Hello and welcome to another episode of Fishbowltales. On today's episode, I'm going to be fabricating a crossbar that's going to run horizontally across the front of our engine bay. As is the case with most things that I've fabricated on this channel, we have some prerequisite work to get done before we can start fabricating the upper and lower radiator hoses. The first of which is a horizontal support that's going to span from one side of the engine bay to the other that will tie together these two vertical supports. To start out, I'm going to be using a combination of magnets, this level, and a digital angle gauge to find out where this bar is supposed to land in the engine bay. Alright, so I've got the angle gauge reading 0 on top of the level. Since the bus is on the driveway and it's just a little bit of an angle, the level itself isn't very accurate. So I've got the angle gauge zeroed out. I'll zoom in on it and give you a look at that. There she is. What this level represents is the bottom of the tube that's going to span across this engine bay. Now this tube also intersects with the bracket on the top of the radiator on that side of the bus there. That's going to tie everything together and give us a lot of strength way up high in the engine bay that we wouldn't otherwise have. I'm going to pull a measurement across the top of this level from side to side so we can see how long our tube needs to be. Alright, so I've taken the angle at which this tube here is going to meet our fictitious tube here. If we remember from doing the radiator ducting, that angle is 30 degrees. Now I built both of these vertical support tubes that are on either side in a jig so that they are absolutely identical to each other. There have been some liberties taken to make everything work and line up and look square in the engine bay of this bus. If you guys have ever worked on a vintage bus before, you know that not everything is perfectly true and square on these things. And that is definitely the case for our bus. So a couple of things have been tweaked and moved around just a little bit. Not enough for you to see, but just enough to make everything appear to be perfect. On this side here, this is the road side of the bus. I've actually dropped the level down an extra 1/8 of an inch to get the reveal to look right between this cowl panel and our tube. Now that also makes the reveal look right between the top of the valve cover and the tube. Alright, so the piece of material we're going to be using for today's project is this piece of 1.5" OD 120 thousandths wall thickness DOM tubing. Now this is the perfect candidate for what we're doing because the OD is incredibly accurate and the wall thickness is exactly 120 thousandths of an inch. Now you might be thinking, since the two side upright supports are removable, wouldn't it be unwise to solid weld something in between them? And the answer is an absolute yes, which is why we're going to be using these ID tube clamps. Now they look just like that. They bolt together. There's one on either half of that clamshell. And when they're broken down, they look just like this. So that allows our center tube to slide out however we desire it to be removed. Now DOM tubing is the perfect candidate for using an ID tube clamp because it has no weld seam down the inside of the tube. It is completely smooth and it's held to a really nice tight tolerance. Now if you're like me and you learn better from seeing something in front of you and visually drawing it out, this is the route I chose to go. I'm not particularly fond of doing the math, so here's the way I do it. So I found the short end of our tube to be 64.5 inches long. I've drawn out an 1.5" tube on the bench and lined up that 30-degree angle with the edge. I've drawn a line straight up and I've measured over from the top of that line to where it meets our 30-degree angle. And that gives us exactly 1 inch of extra material that we need to add to each end of the tube in order for it to land on that 30-degree angle. That gives us a measurement on the long side of the tube of 66.5 inches. But it doesn't end there. If we were to pull that measurement across the engine bay at 66.5 inches, our cross support bar would hit the two uprights something like this. And we don't want that, because if you look through there, there's a gap down the side of the tube because it's hitting it flush and there's no cope in the tube. So what we need to do is add extra material on top of that in order to cope that tube correctly and get it to land exactly perfectly on that bar. Now to do that, I usually add 1/3 of the diameter of the tube on each side, so we have enough material to nest in that tube and get it to wrap around. Well, friends, let's see how we did. Oh, that's not bad at all. That is not bad at all. There is one major problem with this that I didn't anticipate. And that's the fact that our bar that we're using to go across the top is 1.5 inches, and the down bars are 1 3/4. I purposefully left the copes a little bit long, so that's why it's not exactly in place, which is good because I wasn't anticipating it being the wrong size in the first place. So now I'll go back, cope those holes to the right size, and take enough material off to sneak it into place, and we'll try and fit it again. Well, that really threw me for a loop, because I know a year ago when I built these uprights, I had saved a piece of 1 3/4 tube to build this crossbar out of. And here it is. So the other night, when I came up here and measured the piece of tube that I needed so I could order the tube clamps, I grabbed the wrong piece of material out of the material rack. Funny thing is, this piece actually says, "Bus, do not use," right on it. I don't know what to say about that. What I can tell you is that we lucked out anyway, because this tube, in the location that I want it to span across the engine bay, worked out perfectly. This tube is actually too short. So if I hold that in place, kind of something like that, you can see we're about 4 inches short on the far side there. So it would span the engine bay kind of way down in here. So it all works out in the end. Alright, so I've taken an extra 1/2 inch off per side and I've coped both sides to 1 3/4 inches. Now there's about a 20% chance that I completely missed the mark and that this is going to fit like crap. But there's an 80% chance that I got it right. So let's check it out. Not bad at all. Alright. Still gotta come in just a little bit more. Might need to put just a little bit more angle on the mill. But that's close. I'm happy with that. That's good progress. Alright, so it's fitting pretty nicely in the engine bay. What I'm gonna do now is not get it to fit absolutely perfect. And the reason for that is because I need to cut both of the ends off and cut a section of the center of the bar out so that we can put our tube clamps in. Rather than going back and forth to the mill and notching the tube farther and farther to get it to fit just right, I'm going to cut the ends off and adjust the width of the tube by cutting material out of the center to account for our tube clamps. That way I could just take it right to the saw, cut it off, and adjust that width without having to put everything back, get it lined up, and notch it in the mill, because it's just a lot of work in there. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing that, and I will come back to you when we're ready to tack this thing in place. You guys are going to love this. Look at how freaking stellar that turned out. Oh man, oh man, oh man. Look at that. I'd say it's just about time we start welding this thing back together. So I'm getting ready to weld the tube clamps onto the center tube. This is the way I've got everything set up. I've got half of the tube clamp removed, and they're sitting up on top of a matching set of vice jaws with a magnet referencing 90 degrees on the end there. I've got the same thing going on the other end. And the reason I've got everything set up this way is because these tube clamps need to be indexed perfectly so that this bar can be removed without binding up or without having to spread it apart and use a whole lot of force. Alright folks, well I'm going to pick you back up tomorrow because it is windier than heck out here and it is starting to drizzle. So the next thing that I have to do on this bus is tack this bar in place in the bus, and I just can't do that with all this wind out here right now. So I'll check back with you guys tomorrow. Welcome back folks. The weather is still a little bit precarious. It's not raining and we don't have any wind today though, so I'm going to try to get this thing burned in here before the wind picks up. Let me show you guys what I've got going on. So I've got everything cleaned up and ready to weld on both sides. I've got the welder yarded out here, and I'm going to try to burn this in before we get any kind of nasty weather. Let me pull you off of the tripod and show you what we've got going on. Nope. Wrong screw. Come on now. Alright. Cab. Oh, looky there. Not too bad. My start and stop. Went over the top. And I just have to get in and do the backside. Well, the wind picked up about 5 seconds after I started welding. I was able to get it finished up behind this canvas drop cloth. It's not my best work, but it's stuck on there. So that's all I could say. Check it out. So here's the setup. That's what I was welding behind. And there is our finished product. Don't critique me too hard, I am not a professional. But it's on there. And I'm happy with it. So I'm gonna let that cool down, and we're gonna see if we can actually get this bar removed back out of here. Well, this is the moment of truth. And I can tell you already that it's not gonna come out of here easily. Let me show you what I mean. When I break this second Allen loose, you're probably going to hear a little bit of tension release. Oh, maybe not. Well, I suppose if I was wearing a hat, I'd have to eat it, because that wasn't bad at all. How about going back in? Oh yeah, that's a different story. Yeah, we might be a little less lucky going back in with it. Yes. So I think to get this thing back in here, I mean there's probably a 32nd or so of an inch of misalignment on this side. We'll probably have to use a ratchet strap across the engine bay and just suck everything together, because these ends did pull down just a little bit when I welded all of it. Well, anyway, that just about does it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you feel so inclined, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next one. That's the ticket. Precision fit? I guess so.